I think I have plenty of ammo. Hey guys, how's it going? Woo, all right. So before we start, and I trip over this, how many of you guys have seen Red vs. Blue by Rooster Teeth? Any Red vs. Blue fans? Couple? All right. I think it's pretty hilarious, and I think it really illustrates the dynamic that we have currently with a lot of people between red and blue teams, this animosity. Not really animosity, but, you know, working against each other. And so let's talk a little bit how we can change that. For starters, a little bit about me. I'm a security consultant with Vilepoint in Auburn Hills, Michigan. I'm a member of La Dosa Nostra. We have a CTF team going on. Also a member of MySec. And, well, you know what? I'm going to stand over here so I don't walk in front of it. All right. And if you need to get a hold of me, that's my email address, and that's my Twitter. Okay. So we have a client. Let's call them Client Zero. And they came to us one day in 2013 and said, hey, guys, we've got an issue. We're undergoing an M&A, which is a merger and acquisition, and we have an insider threat. We're very worried about someone taking our information and blowing away the entire possibility of any sort of merger. We said, all right, well, how do we do this? And they asked us questions like this. Well, what sort of policies should we put in place? What sort of procedures? How should we implement them? How should we roll them out? What should we buy? We said, you know, look, that's not really the right question at this point. Everyone has a different idea of what they should do. Everyone has a different idea of what product they should use. Instead, we need to start with why. Now, Simon Sinek has an excellent talk, TED Talk, called How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And in this talk, he built something called the Golden Circle. This is it. You have to start with the question why. You have to know the motivation before you can go on to the process and before you can go on to the what. The example that Simon Sinek used was Apple. I mean, we're all familiar with Apple, and they're an excellent company, but do any of you guys know the tagline for Apple, what their motto is? Whatever. Think different! Think different, exactly. Thank you. What's that? No, it is not. But it does illustrate motivation. That is their motivation. Now, regardless of whether or not you think they steal people's ideas and then remarket them is beside the point. They're still thinking different. Then they come up with the how and the what, but that's the point. So we start with the questions, and this will be different for every company, but we need to know why the bad guy is going to target, what is their motivation, what are they going after, and what is the motivation for that company to stay in business. Then we can ask ourselves the how. How are we going to protect them? Now we work out the process. Are we going to use ACLs? Are we going to use SIMs? Are we going to create new policies? And we can also work out how the bad guy is going to attack the company, which allows us to move on to the what. If you notice, this is where the action is happening. Before we're talking, we're planning, we're deciding, we're not actually doing anything. And even here, we're still going to be planning, but this is where your action items are. And if you notice, the DMZ is down there, if you can see it, it's kind of crossed out. These right here are listed in order of importance. You want to obviously secure your critical business services first, before your core infrastructure and server network. You want to put all your the majority of your effort into where you have the most control. You don't have a lot of control over your DMZ and who's going to be attacking that, but you have a lot of control over what happens with the critical business services. So I made this lovely triangle in Microsoft Paint the other day. And I think this illustrates the concept a little better than the golden circle, at least for IT and security. Because the why has to build off the how, which then allows you to know the what. So overall, the point is, do something. Do what's right for you. What we are doing for this client and what we're discussing today may not be what's right for you and for your client or your company. But the point is, do something, because you don't want to be stuck sitting around feeling depressed that you have no control. So let's define what we're talking about between our red teams and our blue teams. So who are the blue team? The blue teamers represent? Yeah. So our blue teamers can be sysadmins, network admins, SIM analysts, consultants, anybody who's responsible for building and securing the infrastructure. And in this model that we built, we want to worry about two main controls, detective and preventative controls. By detective, we mean monitoring. So Nagios, SIM, maybe something like Doppler if you're feeling particularly BOFH-ish. And then by preventing, we mean stopping the attacker at that step in the attack path. So vulnerability management, ACLs, firewalls, IPS, all these devices, that's what we mean by preventative controls. So specifically what we're talking about in this case with detection is with their SIM. So it allows you to quickly identify within a few hours of a potential compromise. The better you configure it, the better intelligence that you can get. And when you create your VM program, the mindset you want to have when going into that is to use that to identify your most critical host. Where do your critical business servers reside? Okay. How many red teamers do we have out here? I think the blue team beat you out. I'm sorry. Woo! And out of the red teamers here, how many people do we have doing penetration tests on a regular basis? Penetration tests are awesome. They're fun. And they're required as part of audits, and there's this whole we break it, you fix it mentality. But how do you know that your remediation is working if you've never even tested it? Which brings us to security exercises, which is kind of what this and threat modeling is kind of what the entire Purple Team program is based off of. You model a threat, and then you select specific stages. And using the metrics from your blue side, you say, okay, we're supposed to be able to prevent and detect these. Can we actually do it? And you can model the behavior of that threat, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the really cool thing about the exercise is that there's minimal risk. You don't have to use, back orifice or the black hole exploit or anything like that. You can just kind of use basic sysadmin tools. So here's a rundown of what the difference is. If you notice, they both use real techniques and real objectives. But instead of executing an actual attack, you're modeling the attack. You don't actually have to execute it. And then you use that to test specific controls as opposed to your overall security posture. So right now, this is kind of where the whole Purple Team thing happens. But I think Raf Mudge said it best. I actually stole this from Wolf's podcast. But he said, my idea of hacking is taking the tactics, techniques, and procedures that different threats are using today and using them against our organizations when they have a mature program to understand how our controls stand up when exercised by a sophisticated thinking adversary. Now, what does that mean? That means that we need to be modeling these attacks. We need to be taking what's happening and testing our ability to stop them. But the most important part is you have to have a mature program. You have to know what you're going to do. You have to know your why before you can do the how and then the what. So we take our knowledge of security and we take our knowledge of our weaknesses from our blue team and our red team and we combine them. And what we can do there is we can then take that, wrap that around our critical business services and have a better posture overall. And the cool thing about this isn't just the IT teams. This isn't just risk and compliance. Everybody in the company has a stake in your infrastructure, in what you're doing. Talk to your managers. If you can get the time, talk to a VP. Talk to the people whose entire life depends on this infrastructure. Find out what's important to them. Because what's important to them and what's important to you intersect, and that's where you're going to find your most critical services. And in doing so, you can go from being the little guy in the center caught between two parties fighting and start fighting off thousands of missiles like APT. Each one of those is supposed to be, and if you're drinking, drink. Okay, so here are the goals. We want to create realistic scenarios, identify how we're going to protect ourselves, test that specific scenario, and then test the environment. The idea here is to drill down from possible scenarios to the most likely, and then test it. So this is how we did it at Client Zero. We did weekly threat modeling. So we sat down, we talked about it, and actually at 3 o'clock, Wolf is going to be talking about the MISEC model called attack paths. So if you think that threat modeling takes a long time and is a real arduous task, he's probably going to be able to change your mind. And then we moved to tabletopping. We moved to tabletop exercises every other week. So we sat everybody down and we talked about how our response procedures would go, how we would do everything. So we've got our why, now we have our how, and then we have our security exercises monthly. And then we test all the stages of the attack path. So that by the time our yearly pen test comes around, we've eliminated all the low-hanging fruit. We know how we want everything to run. Now we can just see, well, hey, is there anything that we missed that an outside person would see? So, in another awesome Microsoft Paint triangle, this one is inverted. But it illustrates the concept of drilling down from your threat models, taking a whole portfolio of scenarios to testing one scenario in a pen test. We kind of want to look at our infrastructure like a citadel, in most respects. We have our critical services in the center, and then we have layers of protection around that with other services placed as needed. So threat modeling is great. You know, this is where you want to spend a reasonable amount of time, but it does not take a lot of time and effort, as you'll find out at, I believe it's 3. We did one model weekly, and it allows you to build this portfolio of attacks. So that way, while you're trying to, how am I doing on time? While you're trying to justify this program to your management, you can say, well, hey, look, I have this entire portfolio of potential attacks. Here is our ability to prevent and detect these, and here is our percentage of coverage. So if you do need something, you can say, and look, if we did this, or if we bought this, I plug in the new values, and suddenly we have this much extra coverage. Metrics are awesome. So which model should you choose? Well, there's a couple. You know, you've got the SDLC threat model from Microsoft, or Stride. You've got Cyber Kill Chains of Doom from Lockheed. And then Wolf has the attack paths out of MySec that we're going to be talking about. So, oddly enough, I'm going to be talking about attack paths for one slide. This is the model that we used at the client, and basically we modeled the insider threat path, which really was an objective, but there were some other issues. We operate under the idea of a sophisticated thinking adversary, like Mudge said. And so we went through the whole process, and we came out with this. This was a real quick win. We put this into the SIM. We looked for local to remote traffic, with the flow bias being local, meaning that there was a large upload coming through, not a download. And if the flow was greater than 100 megs in one direction, and then increase the severity if they went to a known cloud storage site. So it's a pretty simple rule, but it does a lot and adds a lot of coverage. So we then moved to a tabletop. We sat down and we talked about how we wanted to do this. Now, tabletops are a little more expensive in terms of time and effort. You know, you have to get people from different areas, different business units to sit down and talk about how they want to go over this. The most important part is that you have your table while you're doing a tabletop. If you're standing around, it gets really, really painful. So we modeled the insider threat. We gathered everyone together and we said, all right, this is what's happening. How are you going to respond to this? And we found out nobody had any idea what to do. They were kind of like, well, I guess I'd go talk to this person. Well, does that person know that they're on the chain or the buck pass chain? Well, no. So this is a really great way to synchronize your teams. So then we moved on to performing exercises. I'm going to speed up a little bit because we're 20 minutes in and I'm running out of time. I've got a lot more slides. So this is slightly more expensive in terms of time than a tabletop. You take the more likely of the two scenarios, and then you test them across the attack path. This allows you to see if your controls are working, if you can prevent and detect these controls, and if your incident response procedures are working. You can wrap metrics around that, show that to management, and then show evidence of progress as well. Here's an example over stage 4. If you're doing persistence, basically all you'd have to do is, I gave it actually here at Chicago last year. You can use sysadmin tools to create a remote access toolkit. And using that, you can test your ability to perform persistence without actually installing anything bad on your box. What we did for the client 0 is we just created a 1 gig file. This will create a 1.1 gig file of zeros in about 2 seconds. And then we try and uploaded it. Super simple. And you would do this for each stage, but in the interest of time, we're going to skip. But the point of the whole exercise, and this is really important, this is what you're looking for. I mean, it's really, really funny to see someone say, oh yes, we have this sort of protection. We have a WAF. It's in place, and they check it off on the audit. And then you go and do a pen test, and then you see, well, the WAF's been disabled, and nobody checked it because everyone just assumed it worked. When you find this, this is awesome. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our assessments. They're the most expensive in terms of time and capital. You know, they can range from $10,000 to $50,000 depending on who you go with. It's very, very expensive. But what you want to do with this is you want to create targeted scenarios. You want to say, hey, look, we're still very worried about this path. Can you try and exploit across this and achieve this objective? And if you can't do it across that path, find some way to achieve this objective, which you've already identified as the why that you're in business. So, for example, at this client, client 0, we had external access, right? They wanted to test to see if anybody could sit in their parking lot, break into their guest Wi-Fi, and exfiltrate data. It was cool. They had DLP, they had lots of PII. And so we decided to combine their objectives. We decided to combine the insider threat with external access and attack their wireless network. And it was just a bunch of small little things. For example, the guest password was the company name followed by the year. There was a one-to-one NAT on the domain controller. There was an RPC nullbind on that domain controller. And then when we queried, we found a domain admin account with the username and the password. Game over. So real quickly, where to start with this? The best place to start is really with gathering intelligence. Know what your business does, like at a fundamental level. Know what threats are out there. Know why they're going to come after you, and know why that you're in business. And then you can move on to threat models. And you can do this without, in your free time, when you have some downtime at work. I know many of you don't. It is what it is. But when you have that downtime, you can build these threat models. You can show evidence of improvement to your management and say, all right, hey, look, just like we talked about, we have this much improvement if we do this. That helps. But again, the point is to do something. Be proactive. Do what's right for you. What we just talked about may not be right for you, but do something. Any questions? Young lady in the front. Any other questions? From the lady in the back. That is the LDN logo, by the way.
Very nice. It is very nice.
What is LDN?
I already talked about it.
Never mind.
Oh boy. Why? No.
No.
Okay.
You've talked about the roles of operations versus dev. What would you say is the most important thing to do to integrate operational security versus dev security?
Thanks for that question. Actually, as one of the biggest wins that you can do with this is integrating your AppSec programs in with your internal security programs. My mentee, actually, Chris Fotes, I think I'm saying that correctly, Fotes, just gave an amazing talk on that around 11:30. It's an excellent talk. I highly suggest that you find it. It's going to be on Iron Geek's website. But that is the biggest win that you can do, is you want to integrate your AppSec program with your internal security program and synchronize them. Synchronized security. I am actually out of time, but if you come to Circle CityCon, I will be giving this talk in full, where I will discuss how to integrate your AppSec and your internal sec programs.
Shift the paradigm.
And I will be shifting the paradigm, yes. Not really. With lots of synergy. Any other questions? Questions from the peanut gallery up there? D-Tom? You got nothing? Oh. Yo! The question that the gentleman in the second row was asking was, if I understood it correctly, it was, what works when you're trying to decide between red and blue and putting it together and taking the elements of them. And again, it's going to differ between the companies, like, what we talked about, but the key points is taking the knowledge of your weakness. So know where you're weak through pen testing, through security exercises. Know where you're strong through your threat modeling, through your table topping. and increase your strength through that. And then combine that together when you have your pen test, and then to further that on. So basically, red feeds blue, blue feeds red feeds blue, back and forth until you have this really, really strong nugget of an infrastructure. Strong nuggets. Thank you, Frank. Have any other questions? Eve. Piping cat to cat is a very, very complicated process involving FIFOs and cats named FIFO and dev TCP and the bash attack and all sorts of crazy things.
How does the bash attack fit into all that?
So if that's the end of the questions and or trolling, thanks guys.